I'm Cynthia Rowland, and this is episode 133 of EO Radio Show. This is our 23rd in a series of quick tip episodes focusing on the details of state registration of nonprofit corporations. In previous episodes, we talked about filing in Delaware and California, which are the most frequently used by our clients, most of whom have a connection with California. The previous episodes also have covered 41 states and the District of Columbia. With the help of Joe Hilliard, today we look at the basic state filing requirements for nonprofit corporations operating in Mississippi and Georgia. After today's episode, the only remaining states are Idaho, Iowa, Kansas, Missouri, Montana, and Nebraska. You can find all the prior episodes on our website or at the Farella YouTube channel, where there's a playlist just for state filing requirements. Welcome to the EO Radio Show, your nonprofit legal resource. Brought to you by the Exempt Organizations Group at Farella, Braun & Martel. My name is Cynthia Rowland, and I'm a partner at Farella. I'm a business and tax lawyer with more than 30 years of experience advising clients on nonprofit and charity law. Through this podcast, our lawyers and guests will discuss a range of legal and business issues impacting the nonprofit world because we understand you work hard every day to make your community a better place to live and do business. Many of our programs focus on the basics, and at times we'll do a deep dive into narrow and complicated legal issues. Again, welcome to the EO Radio Show. We're glad you're here. As we discussed in previous episodes, nonprofit corporations are one variety of fictitious business entity. Other varieties include partnerships and limited liability companies. The laws of all the states prescribe certain formalities that organizers of these business entities must go through so that the entity can be regulated and subject to legal process as a person. Since business enterprises aren't natural persons, the laws have developed mechanisms for treating them like natural persons. This is where the state filings come into play. In order for the organizers of these fictitious entities to take advantage of the protection of law, they have to provide notice as to the legal name, the state whose jurisdiction they are claiming for corporate organization laws, a physical address where they can be served with legal process, and certain other information. In this episode, we don't dive into the pros and cons for where to incorporate, but instead we focus on the ease of formation, standardized documents that are available, filing fees, and similar matters. As with all the states we have discussed, if you do business as a nonprofit in Mississippi or Georgia, or solicit charitable contributions there, even if just through the nonprofit corporation's website, the nonprofit may need to have a legal presence and be registered in these two states. For the details on these states, we welcome back Joe Hilliard. Joe is a senior paralegal at Farella. He specializes in formation and compliance matters for all manner of entities, and in particular, charities that are tax exempt under Internal Revenue Code Section 501c3. Prior to working at Farella, Joe worked in-house for several real estate development and management companies in Southern California, working on real estate purchases and vendor contracting. So welcome back to the show, Joe.
Welcome back. It's good to be here again.
Yeah. So let's start like we've been doing with these state updates with checking any updates to the states that we've already covered. What's new there?
For sure. So we're going to talk real briefly about West Virginia. So effective July 2nd of this year, 2025, they passed Senate Bill 525, which clarified their procedures that their Secretary of State must follow when administratively dissolving a nonprofit corporation. Quick note on that. Administratively dissolve usually means that you haven't paid your annual fees or something else in the background. This has nothing to do with you doing paperwork. It's the administrative side. And under this new law, if the Secretary of State determines that a nonprofit meets the criteria for administrative dissolution, the office is still required to provide the organization with a written notice, including the specific grounds for that dissolution. Your nonprofit will then have 60 days to either correct the issue or demonstrate that the stated grounds do not exist. And then if the nonprofit fails to resolve the issue within that time frame, the Secretary of State will sign and file a certificate of dissolution. This is actually kind of nice. As you and I know, we've had ones where it falls through the cracks that annual reports aren't on a calendar. This is a reminder to calendar all the time, of course. And they just dissolve you and you don't know it till 6-7 months down the line. And you have to go through a very long process to be reauthorized or reinstated. So this is actually kind of nice that they've put in a policy of like, oh, we're going to check in with you before we just simply dissolve you.
Yeah, that is nice. And that's something that you and I may want to come back to in a future episode, is to talk about the dissolution mechanics in the various states. Often the charities have no idea that they've been dissolved. And that does keep the onus on the charities to make sure that they're current in all their filings. But when there's turnover in the staff, some of these things sometimes fall through. So that's a great note and a great reminder of a good topic for the future. But with that being said, on to our regularly scheduled program, starting with Mississippi. What does it look like to form a new nonprofit or register a foreign nonprofit in Mississippi?
In Mississippi, we have our Secretary of State that governs the entity formations. They have a web portal for online filings, and this is the only way to file documents. Further, they don't have any of their forms available for preview, so you've got to work your way through the system. And on top of that, you have to open an account and draft one to view the forms. And to register, unlike, well, when we talk about Georgia after this, but like more common to us in California, where you simply have an email and a phone, and they double authenticate you. Here, when you open the account, I had to actually provide my date of birth and the last four of my social security card just to have an account, just to try and form entities in Mississippi. And when I applied, it took some 35 minutes before I even got that confirmation email back from them that they'd run my system. So there's some security going on in the background about in Mississippi. Obviously, we don't want to talk about Brett Favre, but I guess that's the issue is that there's fraud in Mississippi, and that's what they're thinking of. I was joking about that with one of our other attorneys this morning when we were talking about that. So
there's fraud everywhere. I don't think anybody has a corner on that market.
No, I don't think so either.
But it is scourge of the modern age that this authentication slows things down in an era when we want everything snap, snap.
Yes.
Anyway, back to reality here.
For sure. So once you've successfully signed in, then you can choose a drop down for domestic entities and then specifically a nonprofit. Fillable form has several screens, but without completing that first page in its entirety of name, address, registered agent, you're unable to move on. The biggest issue I came up with more specifically there, this initial page has a drop down for planned activities with generic choices. It's not a fillable, it's a drop down menu, and it had such generic things like animal shelters, aquariums, church, private foundations. And then it also asks for at least one NAICS code, and you can add up to 3. I know we've discussed NAICS. That might be one for some point of further episode as well. Discuss what NAICS in its more entirety.
And what does NAICS stand for? It's national.
It is.
It's the codes.
It's the codes from the IRS.
It's just the industry codes. They don't really mean anything other than they're for data gathering purposes, right?
They are the North American Industry Classification System. I can never remember what the C is for. It's classification.
Anyway, you have to add at least one.
At least one, and you can add up to 3 with them.
You're going to have to Google the NAICS codes yourself.
Google your codes yourself. Yeah, that is just a fillable portion there. I didn't move on further to try and see the additional questions it asked. And then without moving, I could not tell whether the 501c3 dissolution language that we want in a form was actually here. But it does show at least one incorporator with an address is required to sign. It was very frustrating. And it was similar for the foreign registration. It's basically the drop down is identical. You choose foreign entities instead, and then you can put foreign nonprofit. And that same first page, it's here's the address, here's what state you're from, what are your planned activities with the drop down and the NAICS codes. On the front page, you can see that at least one director or officer with their address is required to sign. And they do note that it needs a good standing within 60 days of the filing. So I couldn't really tell you for sure if you needed to name your officers and your directors in the initial filings. But as we get into the annual reports, we'll discuss that for Mississippi.
So is it expensive, and what's their turnaround time?
For the domestic nonprofits, it's $50, and then there's an additional $25 fee to file an application for appointment of a registered agent. It was unclear to me whether if you were using someone specific that wasn't an agent already or if it was an agent that's in place, but there is potentially an additional $25. And then for the foreign nonprofit, their application for certificate of authority is $100. And then per the FAQ on their website, filers should receive email confirmation the same day the document is submitted, and in their delightful language, quote, sometimes within minutes of submission, unquote. So they do seem to have I don't know if that's, again, whether that's a product of not a lot of business or if they have their system fully automated nowadays. You and I have talked about this in the background. A lot of the states are starting to use more AI to submit and review things. So either way, they've got their system set up very fast.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
All right. So you had alluded to the annual filings. What goes in the annual report?
For sure. So in Mississippi, as of 2024, annual reports must be filed for domestic and foreign nonprofits. So if we'd started this last year, we hadn't got to them yet, we'd have said no here. But now you have to file an annual report. It's annually by May 15th, irrespective of your formation date. This report is also only available online and only after you've registered, but research indicates that it will need to include your EIN here, your name and address for all the directors and officers, again, a repetition of your NAICS code and a repetition of that statement of purpose.
Okay, so that's an interesting filing date. So May 15, as most nonprofits know, that are on a calendar year basis, that's when your 990 is due unless it's extended. But I'm guessing there's not an extension that goes for the state filing in Mississippi. You have to do that on May 15, regardless of whether your calendar year is whether calendar year is your fiscal year and regardless of whether you've extended your tax return.
Yeah, no, that is correct. It's $0 filing if you're a domestic and $1.25 for your foreign nonprofits.
Okay, so that's not too bad.
No.
So transparency, how much information is actually in this annual filing in Mississippi?
So as we noted, the names and addresses of all the directors and officers will need to be named for both of them. So you've got...
Is that office address?
No, it's just an office address. It's not a home address. Okay. Yes, I could confirm that from looking at the initial organization documents. You could see that it just said office address. It did not have to be a home address.
Okay, great.
And in the background, it said that even though you have to put your EIN into your report, that this was something that did not show up in the public records. I saw that when I went through some of their facts on there, and the facts in the show notes here. But much like, again, there's a higher degree of security here in Mississippi. Like I said, I needed to put part of my Social Security in to get an account and to confirm the entity. They seem to be checking EINs against that in the background again as well.
All right. Well, that's a good thing from a data security perspective. So any other registrations in Mississippi?
For sure. So if you're organized there in Mississippi, or if you're a foreign nonprofit that solicits, holds assets, or does business there in Mississippi, you're required to file an additional registration with the Secretary of State's Charities Division. So it's through the same group, and that has another $50 fee. Then all nonprofits must register with the State Tax Commission of Mississippi, which governs sales and use tax exemptions through their Department of Revenue. They have a PDF fact dedicated specifically to nonprofit organizations on their website, which is actually very helpful for that side and unusual. As we know, usually the tax laws in states are kind of opaque. So that was nice to see. And then links to all that can be found, obviously, to all the Mississippi agencies and a lot of the specific forms that we mentioned here. So
in the show notes.
Yes.
All right. Super. So that made Mississippi pretty straightforward, other than actually getting your account signed up and making sure that the articles actually include the IRS requirements. I'm sure that's all in there. It's just tedious to get there. So moving on, Georgia. What do we need to file in Georgia?
Georgia also goes through their Secretary of State. And like Mississippi, you have to create an account, log in to be able to view the forms and create a new entity. Although their system suggests here simply an email and your phone number and your name, which was more common, we say. They do have a template exemplar PDF for review of all of their articles of incorporation. It's a generic one that has, here's what a profit, here's a nonprofit, which is nice. And it's linked here in the show notes. Unlike Mississippi, you can select a print for mailing of these forms and do it that way instead. You will need to complete the form, though, to be able to print it out, or you can mail it in. And with that, you can mail in, you can follow the template, which is more similar to what we see here in California versus using the form. And again, I would say, given the intricacies we see often with our nonprofits, I would recommend going the paper filing route and drafting one, much like we recommend here in California, versus using the online system. For that, off their template, you need basics, the name, address, registered agent in Georgia, your mailing address, a name and address for each incorporator, and then any optional provisions. And that would be where we would add our non-purposes and our 501c3 dissolution language. Going into the fillable form, this one too was several screen pages, and without completing the name, address, registered agent, you're unable to move on. And again, on this very first page, here too, it asks for your NAICS code and then a subcode under the business purpose section before moving on. And this is not something that was in the template preview, and it didn't ask for that when it showed you their exemplar of what you could just type in and say. So it was kind of an interesting that there seemed to be two different streams that the Secretary of State has. Again, with this, I didn't move on further because I didn't want to try to set up a dummy corporation with a bunch of dummy NAICS to see how far it went.
Yeah.
Then additionally, on the template form, it says all corporations must publish a notice of intent to incorporate in the newspaper, which is either the official legal organ of the county where the initial registered office is to be located, or in a newspaper of general circulation in such county and for which at least 60% of its subscriptions are paid, which was interesting. And again, this is something that was on the template, but not in the website and not easily visible. So it's something that we definitely want you to look at with local counsel, but it has a list of legal organs in the show notes, and the Secretary of State notes the clerk of your superior court could advise you to. And the notice of intent to incorporate has a $40 publication fee that would be directly to the newspaper, and you were supposed to do it the next business day after filing your articles of incorporation with the Secretary of State.
Wow, that is really unusual. And with the death of so many local newspapers, I mean, maybe it's different in Georgia. Maybe there are a lot of local newspapers.
The only one that's comparable, really talk about this so much because it didn't, but in New York, you have the similar requirements for LLCs in some occasions. So this is like not something we've seen normally now.
Yeah, it's very unusual. So how about our foreign nonprofits?
So the foreign, they have a generic application for certificate of authority for foreign profit or nonprofit corporation. Unlike the domestic, here you have a form you can download and mail in rather than a template, or you can use the fillable. It has our normal foreign information: name, when commenced business in Georgia, your name and address of the filer, a registered agent. Here, the Section 5 is a checkbox for profit or nonprofit, and then a fill-in for your home state and the incorporation date there in your home state. In Section 6, you will need to name an address, street address, business address for the CEO, the CFO, and the secretary. And here you need a good standing within 90 days needs to be attached. Again, per my reading here, it doesn't seem that the foreign corporation needs to publish a notice, unlike a domestic, but Georgia's updating their fees into September, and their website had some influx with things updating. So this is something we really want to, if you're thinking about Georgia, come back, confirm it, look at the local rules again. This is something where maybe even local counsel is something great to talk to.
Yeah, sounds like it. And what's the turnaround timing?
So on their website, the Georgia Business Fact notes online filings are generally processed 7 to 10 business days upon receipt. And then paper filings by mail or hand delivery are within 15 business days. And then they caution specifically in lengthier turnarounds in late December through January, and then again at the end of each quarter, late March, late June, and late September. And then it says at least another 15 days for filings at those times of increased workload. So you're talking 25 days potentially for your initial. But they do have a 2 business day expedite service for $120. Same day expedite, $275, and that's if it's received by noon of that business day. And that would be noon Eastern time for Georgia. Documents then afternoon will be reviewed by noon on the next business day. And then they have a $1,200 1-hour expedite if they're received between 9 and 4 on that business day. So obviously, if you make it at like 4:15, you'll get it first thing in the morning on the next day.
All right. Well, sounds like they've got a structure there.
Yes. Obviously, the structure encourages you to pay at least one of the expedites to get something in a timely manner.
Definitely. So other than those expedite fees, what's the cost?
For sure. So in Georgia, and this is where we're talking about starting September 6th. So we're recording August 15th. So in 2 weeks, it goes up. The filing for the domestic is $120. It's $110 plus a $10 service charge. And that's either if you do it paper or online. And then $235 for the foreign, which is a $225 plus the $10 service charge. If you get it in the next 2 weeks before September 6th, the service charge for online is only $5. So that's one of the changes we're seeing. They're upping the price and normalizing it, whether you do it by paper or online. You're no longer getting an online discount.
Got it. Okay. Annual filings. Where else do we need to file our nonprofit information in Georgia?
So in Georgia, the corporations will file their first annual registration within 90 days of the date of incorporation, and then between January 1st and April 1st each year thereafter. Okay. So if we form right now, it's August 15th, the third week of August, you would file your initial roughly November 15th, maybe November 13th, given the weekend days. And then your next one would be due April 1st, 2026. Again, this 90 days is what we see here in California for an initial statement of information, the initial report as well. It's unusual. We don't see it in a lot of states, but for those of us that live here in California, it actually sounds perfectly normal.
Yeah, exactly. It does seem normal.
Yeah.
And these annual filings, is it the fee with that?
So the same thing. It's a $40 fee. It's the $30 for the filing and then the additional $10 service charge. And that's for both the domestic and the foreign.
All right. So let's wrap up a little bit with the discussion of the transparency and privacy concerns and then state agencies.
For sure. So the foreign registration, as we noted, and then all subsequent annual reports for both the domestic and the foreign will ask for the CEO, CFO, and the secretary to be named and a business address to be attached to them. There doesn't appear to be anything naming the directors, though. It's only the officers.
Just the officers.
Just the officers. Just like we saw with Mississippi, here in Georgia, an additional registration with the Secretary of State is required if the nonprofit's organized there in Georgia or if it's a foreign that solicits, holds assets, or does business there. They actually have an excellent checklist for use with this part of the filing. And this registration here will be $35. And then the Georgia Department of Revenue governs their tax exemptions. Their website was a little more oblique didn't have anything that was real easy to look at in terms of that. But The Atlanta Pro Bono organization actually has a very good breakdown of what is needed in Georgia for a nonprofit to register and to keep itself current. So, and there's always a link to that.
Oh, that's nice.
So the Atlanta Pro Bono and then all these relevant departments will be in the show notes.
That's terrific. Well, thanks again, Joe, for the thorough overview. I hope we can talk in the near future about our few remaining states. I think we're down to just a few. What did I have on my list?
Do we have 6 more?
Idaho, Iowa, Kansas, Missouri, Montana, and Nebraska. And then I think we should add on to the series with some occasional updates and some of these obscure topics like dissolution and NAICS codes and things like that. So that's a teaser for our listeners that are interested in this sort of geeky stuff. So thanks for joining me again and keeping the listeners informed.
Yes, thanks for having me, for sure.
So that's all for this episode. Be sure to check out the show notes for links to the resources that Joe mentioned and links to earlier episodes on the states we've already covered. Also, as a reminder, if you go back to earlier episodes for states covered in the past, be sure to check into updated laws before looking at the filing or doing your annual report in the state. As I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, Farella, Braun & Martel has a YouTube channel, and there are several nonprofit playlists, including the one we are building where all the state filing episodes will be in one place. So look for that link in the show notes as well. I'm Cynthia Rowland, and you've been listening to EO Radio Show, your nonprofit legal resource, brought to you by the Exempt Organizations Group at Farella, Braun & Martel. If you have suggestions for topics you would like for us to discuss, please email us at eoradioshow@fbm.com. That's eoradioshow@fbm.com. Thank you for joining us. Until next time, make a difference.